From a life of parties and open bars to life now behind bars, in the past week, P. Diddy has seen some major lifestyle changes. And now we're getting reports that Diddy isn't eating while in jail, and it could be because he thinks someone's trying to poison his food. Plus, he's been transferred to a protected unit that already houses convicted fraudster Sam Bankman-Fried. So what's it like for a high-profile defendant like Diddy to be locked up in one of the most run-down and violent jails in the US? For that, we'll turn to criminal defense attorney and law and crime legal analyst Imran Ansari, who repped other high-profile defendants like Harvey Weinstein and 50 Cent. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. Alright, so big news out of New York, where P. Diddy has been held for more than a week in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. This comes after Diddy's arrest last Monday, following his indictment by a federal grand jury on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. The 14-page indictment lays out some pretty strong claims against Diddy, alleging he's guilty of sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. The indictment goes on to allege Diddy showed a pattern of abuse, mostly against women, that included verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, including the use of extensive grooming tactics. There's also mention of something referred to as freak-offs, which are described as elaborate and produced sex performances that Combs arranged, directed, masturbated during, and often electronically recorded. During these so-called freak-offs, Diddy would often drug his victims, sometimes without their knowledge, to keep them obedient and compliant. Then, Diddy allegedly required these victims to have sex with prostitutes, and oftentimes he recorded that too. Again, these recordings were made without the victim's knowledge or consent. These freak-off sessions were facilitated by Diddy's associates, that the indictment refers to as part of the Combs enterprise. These associates would procure the sex workers, book the hotel rooms where these freak-offs would take place, and stock the rooms with necessities like baby oil and lube. Now is a good time to note that when federal authorities executed search warrants at two of Diddy's properties, they collected 1,000 bottles of lube and baby oil, which puts into perspective the severity and scope of these freak-offs. Also during these raids, federal authorities collected digital evidence of this alleged illegal activity. And they kind of had a heads up that Diddy was recording some of this. Multiple civil lawsuits filed against Diddy starting in November of last year allege he sexually assaulted the plaintiffs and often recorded it. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, but if you're out running errands, listen up, this is for you. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gets you cash back on daily essentials. I use it every time I pump gas. It's so easy and free, why not? All you have to do is get the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. So you pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. The bombshells were first dropped by Cassandra Ventura, or the singer Cassie, when she filed civil suit last November. Cassie dated Diddy for years, and she alleges he was physically, verbally, and sexually abusive toward her during that time. Her lawsuit was settled just one day after it was filed, but that was just the start of the civil suits against Diddy. Since 2023, 11 civil suits have listed P. Diddy as the defendant. And now, one federal indictment lists him as the defendant too. After his arrest, Diddy pleaded not guilty to the charges and was twice denied bail. His legal team offered a pretty sizable bail package too, saying that Diddy would put up $50 million for his release. This would have been co-signed by Diddy, his sister, his mom, his 3 adult sons, and the mothers of 2 of his children. The defense also suggested that Diddy would have major restrictions on travel, a GPS monitor, and even limitations on female visitors. All this was presented last week, but U.S. District Judge Andrew L. Carter said no, arguing this bail package was insufficient to guarantee the safety of the community or to maintain the integrity of the case. So that meant Diddy was remanded to jail, specifically the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the jail, often referred to as just MDC, houses 1,218 inmates right now, of both genders. But according to Diddy's legal team, the jail is notoriously dangerous and run down. Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnifilo, argues there are major issues with the jail, citing violence, poor conditions, overcrowding, and staffing issues. He also cited some startling statistics. 2 inmates have been killed at MDC since this June, and at least 4 inmates have died by suicide over the past 3 years. On top of that, 6 staff members have been charged with criminal activity over the past 5 years. Diddy's team wants him transferred to a different jail in New Jersey, but Judge Carter says it's up to the Federal Bureau of Prisons to make that decision. So for now, MDC is where Diddy calls home. It's usually where defendants are housed after their arrest and as they're awaiting trial in either Manhattan or Brooklyn. But the issues at MDC are so severe that some judges even refuse to send defendants there at all. But even with its less than desirable conditions, MDC is no stranger to high-profile inmates. Previously housing R. Kelly, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Sam Bankman-Fried, who's actually there right now. Bankman-Fried was convicted of fraud and money laundering last November after the collapse of his cryptocurrency exchange, FTX. And as it happens, Bankman-Fried and Diddy are being housed in the same part of MDC, a unit for inmates that requires special protection. That's people like Diddy or Bankman-Fried who are high-profile names, but it also cares for inmates who may need protection as they assist with ongoing investigations in open cases. Since Diddy's move to this area of MDC, there are reports that he's spoken briefly to his children over the phone. Diddy has 7 children, ranging in age from 33 to 23 months old. According to reports, Diddy is concerned about how his kids are handling his arrest and detainment. And meanwhile, they're allegedly in a state of crisis after only experiencing Diddy as a loving, devoted father. Meanwhile, there are other reports that Diddy has stopped eating. This could be because he isn't enjoying the food, but it also could be because he's paranoid that someone is out to get him and may slip poison into his food. But is that likely or even possible? And what are the perils of MDC, especially for a high-profile defendant like Diddy? Here's where we have to bring in criminal defense attorney Imran Ansari, who represented other celebs like 50 Cent or Harvey Weinstein. He says Diddy's arrest wasn't surprising.
I think we all saw the writing on the wall with Diddy in terms of the civil case leading to a federal investigation. We saw the raids on his residence. And I think that the indictment that we see now wasn't so much a surprise. And it was something that we expected arrest was going to come down the line.
Now he has been arrested. He's been denied bail, so he is behind bars in Brooklyn. And there's been a lot of articles about this. His attorneys are saying that the conditions there at MDC are horrific, horrendous. They're not appropriate to stay in. What is your experience there? Is it really as horrendous as they're saying?
I've had many clients who were housed in MDC Brooklyn, and I can tell you the reports that the facility is something that is less than desirable is 100% accurate. There's been a lot of reports of it being below standard in terms of prison standards. And of course, a prison isn't meant to be a comfortable place, but of course, they have to provide the basic human rights to their inmates. And MDC Brooklyn has been plagued with overcrowding, with violence, with poor food, with poor cleanliness. And P. Diddy, who is in a protective custody unit, is still experiencing all the bad things that MDC Brooklyn has to offer, and it doesn't have a lot to offer in terms of comfort or things that an inmate would be looking for.
So obviously, anyone who's behind bars is hoping to have a nice place to sleep, food, comfort, as you were saying. But is this place really dangerous? I know that they listed a couple of statistics that there had been several suicides, even potentially murders. So is it possible that he could be in danger?
So he's in protective custody now in the SHU unit, but his lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, pointed out recent events in that prison, and MDC Brooklyn has been plagued with a lot of violent acts. It's been really criticized in terms of the conditions that prison inmates have to live with, and certainly Diddy would be facing potential dangers because a prison by virtue of it being a prison, is not necessarily a good place to be. It's not a safe place to be, but particularly this facility is known to have a lot of problems in the last few years.
What would it look like for Diddy in this protective care unit, I guess? He's separated from general population, but what is his day-to-day like?
So Diddy's life in the shoe, in that specialized housing unit where he's been placed for his own safety, is going to be something that's rather routine and mundane. He's not going to be necessarily even enjoying some of the things that general population, aka Gen Pop, enjoys, because he's being in a special segregated unit for his own safety, which means he's going to be under more constant observation by guards. His comings and goings in and out of his cell for recreational time and for meal time are going to be more scrutinized. So although the SHU unit is technically for the prison inmate safety, and of course Diddy being a high profile inmate requires that, it also means more restrictions for that inmate.
Following Diddy's arrest, we reported news that he was placed on suicide watch. It's unclear whether he was actually suicidal or if this was just a safety precaution, but we do know a mental health professional visits his cell at least several times a day. Is that possible for Diddy? He may not have these suicidal ideations, but it's just for his safety?
It's pretty routine, especially for a high profile inmate to be placed on suicide watch, especially when they're going from a dramatic change from their life outside prison to a life inside prison, something that they may not be used to. It's typical and routine for an inmate like that to be placed on suicide watch for their own safety. And the prison kind of wants to make sure that, when all eyes are on them, that nothing happens on their watch. So we do know that Diddy's lawyers did say that he's ready and willing to fight the charges and ready to fight the allegations against him, and he's of sound mind. So it doesn't surprise me that he's placed on suicide watch by corrections simply for his own safety and in order for the prison to sort of CYA.
So we're talking about this case simply because Diddy is a huge celebrity, a high-profile defendant who's now placed behind bars, a far cry from the mansions that we're used to seeing him in. What are some of the issues with having a high-profile defendant? Does it make things more dangerous, more difficult? What do you think?
Well, being high profile in prison, based on knowledge from some of my own clients, is somewhat worrying for them, especially when they are coming from an environment which was a polar opposite from what they are experiencing in prison. So it's a shock. It's frightening. And of course, they have to deal with the real reality now that they are behind bars and they're facing criminal charges. It also presents a added sort of hurdle for us as attorneys who are defending a client like that, because we are obviously cognizant of the big change in their life that they're dealing with psychologically, and then also obviously the legal aspects of things, but also the court of public opinion. You are constantly looking at how the public is receiving your client or a defendant when they are high profile, and you are sort of tending to their needs because now they are dealing with such a dramatic change in their life. They went from mansion to prison, and sometimes that's a hurdle along with the legal fight all its own.
And then there's the question of Diddy's communication. Who's he making contact with from the inside? So Diddy has pleaded not guilty to these charges. So of course we're expecting him to bring a strong defense with his attorneys, his team. Obviously they're going to be preparing. But does it add a layer of challenge, the fact that Diddy is behind bars? What does it look like for attorneys hoping to meet with him? Would they have their own rooms? Would they talk over those phone things we see in movies? What would it really look like?
So when you have a client who is behind bars, you are meeting with them on legal visits, and you are talking to them on a secured line, which is an attorney or legal call where it's not being recorded and it's afforded that privilege, that attorney-client privilege, that privacy there. But it does present hurdles when having a client behind bars, because you're sort of really reliant on A, the prison schedule, B, the prison calls. You can't call your client, they're calling you. So even if you have something that you need to talk to your client about urgently, you got to wait until you get that prison call from prison, or you're making that visit yourself to jail to have a legal visit. So it's always easier to represent someone who has been out on bail, because they could come to your office or you could visit them, or even if they're on house arrest, they're typically allowed to come to your law office. So it does present that added hurdle when you're representing someone who is remanded or in jail. But of course, we have to do what we have to do as defense attorneys, and we make it work.
We talked about the side of his defense, obviously speaking with his legal team, but what about his family? We have seen some reports that Diddy